Welcome to the Trick Play Podcast. The full podcast is available on both YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Hello and welcome back to the Trick Play Podcast. I'm Simon Chaskovsky here with Caleb Peterson, and shortly we'll be breaking down all the sports-related news, rumors, and drama that you will want to hear about. This week we talked about the Leafs choking again in hysterical fashion, at least for myself. Less so for a lot of Leafs fans, and Caleb, who is a lot more empathetic of their whole situation, which is good, because I think we were able to have an actual conversation about it, which has ended up being a really good segment, so make sure to check that out. Then we talked about every NHL team's most disappointing player for the 2023-2024 season, which was another great one because we got to talk about all the players that we were so disappointed in, including Huberdeau and Johnny Gaudreau and all of those great guys who just really weren't there this year. And then we moved over to the NHL to wrap things up, or not NHL, NFL, sorry, and wrap things up with the Raiders assistant GM coming out and saying that he was excited for the QB battle between Minshew and O'Connell. And we talked about how the comparison is absolutely there in between that and a certain first video that blew up for Trick Play last offseason featuring Kyle Trask. And we talked about that, which was very, very fun. Make sure to check us out on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter as we have new content coming out every single week on each and every one of those platforms. Caleb, are you ready to get into it?
Absolutely.
This is my intro. This is all I'm doing. I don't think words need to be said. Toronto, to quote a famous YouTuber I used to watch, you fucking blew it, and it was hilarious. I loved it. I laughed my ass off. That was an awesome Game 7. For a bit of context for the few people who did not watch it, because I think the whole hockey world must have been watching that game, because I think no matter what happened, either Boston was going to make history in embarrassing Toronto for like the record number of times at this point. There was some sort of record on the line on either end. Or Toronto was going to end up breaking this curse and moving on and finally getting that monkey off the back. Obviously, Boston won in overtime in what was a beautiful overtime winner by Pastrnak. That was a hell of a pass. But holy smokes, I think I laughed for 10 minutes straight. That was I have no shame in saying which side of the fence I was on that one, because boy was that funny to watch. I can say that personally, I had a great time. I had a great time watching that game. The first two periods were a little lackluster, but it made up for it in the third and overtime, and it was a good one. I know, based on the facial expressions you were making, Caleb, I think me and you are going to have different things to say on this one, which will make it fun, because I have been firmly on the side of screw Toronto for a very long time, because I don't like Toronto. And I think it's absolutely hilarious.
Boston. Well, that's the
thing.
Yeah. It's like, I think all Boston sports teams just give me the biggest ick imaginable. Starting with the Patriots and then like the Bruins, even like the Celtics, and like
I've never hated the Bruins.
I don't care.
I've never had any ill will towards the Bruins.
I've always kind of hated the Bruins. I don't know. And I don't mind Toronto to the extent where I just feel bad for them at this point.
Yeah.
Just because it's been so long and they've been through so much, it's just like I feel they'd be
so
insufferable.
Funny.
Yeah, I don't know. I felt bad. It's just like it's such a brutal way to end it. Like, because the Leafs were up in this game, right? They scored. They had a glimmer of hope where, I believe it was Nylander who scored.
They looked really good in the first period.
Play. Yeah, they had. Then the goal they scored was a beautiful play from Matthews, where he makes it look like there's a turnover. He makes it look like he's going to shoot, and then is able to pass it over to Nylander basically as an open net. But that lasted all of about 1 minute before. Like a random, just like throwing a dart shot kind of goes in.
I mean, it's just the mind games of it, right? Like, you got to put yourselves in the head of those Leafs players, because, like I said, there's history on the line. Either way, no matter who wins or loses this game, something's happening.
They all know
something's happening, right?
Even though none of them were there for like that. What was it? 4-1.
There was a lot more. There was a lot more for the Bruins, but on the Leafs side, no. pretty much no. I don't think there was any players that stuck around.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like, no,
Yeah.
no, I don't think any Leafs carried over from
Yeah.
that era because I was like at this point like a long time ago, like 10 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, probably 10 or 11 years ago. But you still know that they know that, right? It's the same thing with the first round stuff, where it's like none of them were there the last time they made it into the first round, and none of them have been there for the entire like first round drought. But you know it weighed heavy on them.
Yeah.
And it's at the point where there's just been disappointment after disappointment that I frankly don't know what they can do differently.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I think last season's roster was the best roster they've ever had in this run, especially like picking up Ryan O'Reilly at the deadline. Like
Yeah.
that was their all in.
They were a
year,
scary
and
team last year.
And they got their asses handed to them by Florida. And it's to the point this year where I thought they were still a good team, if not.
Yeah.
And it's like maybe they get over the hump, but I don't know. Like I don't know how you can get any better. And so they make the coaching change, which is kind of the big headline around it in terms of firing Sheldon Keefe. But like I don't know. I guess my question is, do you think that'll even do anything?
No.
Like firing the coach just feels like moving
No.
deck chairs on the Titanic.
Well, yeah. No, that's a really good way of putting it. Actually, it's too small of a change. I mean, it. Of course, it depends who they bring in. They need to bring in somebody who can really set like the whole. I don't even know what the word would be. You need to change everything about the environment, about the culture. Everything needs to change. And I mean, I've said this for a few years now, and I know it's controversial because of how talented they are, but you gotta just toss everything. Maybe not everything, but you gotta blow something up, right? You gotta show the players that that a first round exit isn't okay because these players are now accustomed to it. All of these guys who have been on this team for however long now, that is pretty much every year for the last 4 or 5 years been a serious contender. They've they're used to first round exits at this point, right? I mean, I don't know. The more I look at this team roster wise, everything, you need to blow it up because like you pointed out, the year before this one was their best by far roster wise. I even remember saying it when we talked about their roster at the beginning of the year. It is in my opinion, I remember saying that it was a significant drop off because I just don't think it's what they need. I think you need to really swap out. You need some elite players who have won before. And I don't even know what that necessarily means, but it's not what they currently have. You need to move. I know the big rumor going around right now is Mitch Marner potentially being on the move here.
That was what I was going to bring up.
Yeah. I think that's where you got to start. You got to move Mitch Marner. And it sucks because he's your homegrown talent. He's been on the team his whole career. Him and Matthews obviously play well together, but not in the first round, not against the Bruins. You need to bring in some guys who know how to win and will show up in the playoffs when it matters. And honestly, the crappy thing is I don't even know what a trade like that would look like because whenever we see an elite player like Marner getting moved, usually it's for picks or prospects or something like that. This is a trade that needs to be almost a 1-for-1 in a weird way. You need to trade Marner, at least in my opinion, you need to trade Marner for somebody who can immediately help you contend next year if you want to keep the rest. If you want to keep Matthews, if you want to keep Riley, if you want to keep all those guys, Tavares, you need to bring in somebody who can help them out and not just a bunch of prospects for the future. Because if you're going to do that, you might as well just gut everything. You might as well trade everyone else. Yeah. So I'm curious to see what they do. I think a Marner trade has the potential to be one of the biggest trades we've seen in a long time if they end up getting a big player like that. But if they end up getting prospects, then I feel bad for the people of Toronto, kind of.
I mean, I feel bad anyways because it's like even a move like moving Marner, I don't know if that really goes anywhere to solve your problems.
It completely depends on what they get back.
Bringing in a player that like knows how to win, but how do you quantify that, right? Like what player would you even have in mind that would be available? Like
gotta bring in rings.
any player that's won? I don't know. I mean, like I don't know if that necessarily solves it because you bring in one player who's won. I don't think that balances out the entire history of that franchise. Like
okay, fair enough. But it's
to the point like I don't even know if there's anything because if I'm the Leafs, if I'm Tree Living, I'm just throwing up my hands and saying I don't like I seriously don't know anymore what you can do to make this team any better. because they had that, right? Like,
Oh
I
yeah.
think Dubas was one of the most forward-thinking GMs and one of the better
Oh yeah.
GMs in all of the NHL. And there's a reason
Dubas
this
was a
roster was
lot
so
better than
good.
Trilliving.
Yeah,
Like people
that's a
don't talk about
no-brainer.
that a lot, but
Uh,
he absolutely killed it in Toronto, at least for the most part.
he did, and it's just the Toronto of it all that's what got him fired. Even with Sheldon Keefe, I think Sheldon Keefe is a good coach. I think it's just the
Yep.
Toronto of it all that got him fired, where it's just like it's the only thing they really could do. I
It's
don't really
not
know
the
what the
coach, it's the
move is.
players, right? Like, and you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I think you got it. I think you got it. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think they're going to trade Marner and make another run at it with whatever they get back, because that's just what they're going to do. But I don't think that's what they should do. I think they should get as much as they can out of all the players that they currently have. I know it would probably be heresy to say try and make a move with a guy like Matthews, because they're never going to do it because he's their franchise guy. But I almost feel like you gotta just completely clean ship or clean house. Like
Yeah.
it's just because like you point out, what do you do? What do you even do? Right? In my head, what I think you just get rid of the bleeding. Like if they do want to make another run for at it, you trade Marner, you somehow get a better goaltender, because I know Samsonov, he wasn't in Game 7 he was good, but he's not a playoff goaltender. Neither is Joseph Woll, will never be either. I think you got to bring in an elite goaltender. It starts there, because at least
Yeah.
for me, when the rest of your team sucks, an elite goaltender can at least maybe steal you a game. And Toronto really doesn't have a lot of those types of players in the playoffs. I'm going to emphasize in the
Toronto
playoffs. But
is Toronto a sneaky candidate for a Markstrom trade to connect to the point you're making?
I've heard that before, and mostly it's because of the Treliving connection there.
Yeah, I don't think that's too far fetched though, honestly.
Yeah, no, it's the same issue that a lot of contenders have when trading for Markstrom. It's the cap. Like, he's not a cheap goalie.
Yeah.
He's very good. It has been well documented that if you surround him with a good defense and allow him to play his kind of hockey, he'll win. He'll win for you. He's a very good goaltender. My only issue with that is I guess I don't know what they'd give us. Would be my
I
question.
feel like it's just draft capital at that point. I don't know if they have a first round pick or something, but if
probably.
you're the Leafs, because I think I'm kind of on the opposite side of the table as you, where you're saying just like tear it all down. I'm just
Yeah.
like I don't know. This core is other than Tavares, the core is still young and it still has so much talent in terms of.
That's
and you
the
just
tough thing,
locked up
right?
You just locked up Nylander. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure Matthews also got a long term
Matthews
deal.
is in here for
I
the
think
long deal.
Marner
Yep.
and Tavares not so much, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Yeah,
like
Tavares is
you
the other guy I'd get rid of. Out of the people you just listed.
you tear it down for what, right? Just because like they keep losing in the first round. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, but I don't know. It's not even like you say it's not the coach, it's the players, and I guess I
No,
feel like
I
it's
think
something
that is
even
the
bigger
case.
than that. It's just like such an enigma in terms of like
Well, it's Toronto.
why they continue to
The
struggle.
big answer
Yeah.
is
I
the
mean,
logo.
it is
It's
the
the
city.
logo. It's the city. It's all of that. It's the fans. It's the media.
Put this
It's
roster anywhere else.
Yes, exactly. And that's what everybody has said forever. And that's exactly why they need to do it. They need to like
But then how will you ever win? Like, are you going to
Well,
build a
I
better
don't
roster than
know.
this?
I have no clue. Because the
That's the
funny thing
thing.
is the funny thing is you're exactly right, but I still think you got to blow it up, because clearly it's not going to work. It's never going to work. This is probably one of the weaker out of all the Boston teams they have ever had to play. And I mean ever in the first round. I honestly think this might have been the weakest Boston team. Like, they have played some
I would
bad.
agree.
They have played some really, really good Boston team. This one didn't feel like it. Going into this series, I remember, because I mean, we talked about it a bit as well. I don't remember if we talked about it on or off the podcast with the whole draft thing we did, but it was. I do remember you were obviously high on Toronto, and for good reason. They were a good team this year,
Yeah.
and Boston wasn't as good of a team. They were still great, but they weren't as good as Toronto. They didn't have the talent. Really, the only spot that they could compete with, or obviously blew Toronto out of the water with, was goaltending. But the difference is it's the difference between Toronto and Boston, just as cultures, is Toronto and Boston is Boston, right? And which is why I think, I mean, Matthew Tkachuk said it best after the game. in basically once you saw that it was going to overtime, you knew Boston was going to win it. And I think that was when I was watching it, I was thinking that. When you were watching it, I'm sure you were thinking it, because in overtime, Boston wins. It's just because that is the culture they have built. They do not lose in the first round. They do not. They go far.
I guess, but I mean, think about it this way too. If the puck doesn't bounce off the boards in such a lucky way for Boston, where it goes right to Pastrnak.
I agree with you. No, that was the luckiest goal ever.
It's a one like it's that bounce of the puck differently, and we're talking about this all totally differently.
So is winning right? 7 straight first round series against the same team. Like it's
I don't know.
Everything's luck, everything's culture, everything's like it's so insane. It's so insane because the odds of it ever happening again. Like, what do you think the odds are of another team out there that isn't Toronto and isn't Boston doing this to each other again in the rest of NHL history?
Well,
I would say no. That's not gonna happen.
With how the playoffs are structured, it might actually be pretty likely. I mean, you look at
I guess LA.
It's much less
Edmonton,
dramatic. LA,
yeah.
Edmonton.
Yeah.
They lost like 3
The main difference, I think the biggest difference, though, is the fact that if you really just look at all the teams that have been assembled over that 7-year, like 7 different teams for both sides, I bet you, if you go and just look at both of them and just pick a team based on which is more talented, Toronto probably wins maybe 5 out of 7. Years. Yeah, both. Like, I'd say even in the earlier years, it's not like it wasn't close. Like, Boston was obviously better because that was back when they were winning cups. But even then, I don't know. At least to me, like, Toronto has always... Having the best team has never been the issue, I guess. So you're absolutely right in that point. I think your point on that, and just the fact that what do you even change about the roster? What do you even change about the team, though? What do you change about the coaching? What do you change about the general manager? We've seen all of it change 100 times and nothing's worked. So, I mean, I don't even know what to say. I guess in the sense that, it's not going to work. Nothing's going to work. I think it's funny because I don't like Toronto media and their coverage of the Leafs. I think that a lot of Leafs fans can be annoying. So at least to me, what I thought it was a real knee slapper of a time when I saw them lose to Boston again. I also like Boston a little bit, but I don't know.
I hate Boston. I don't know.
I hate Toronto.
it just feels like the definition of insanity at this point.
Yes.
For the Leafs fans,
which is exactly why I blow it up.
But if I'm the Leafs, I want to keep banging my head against the wall. Like, I want to just keep trying at it, because I don't think you're gonna have a better shot in the next because this roster doesn't if you tear it down, you're not gonna be guaranteed this good of a roster again.
No, absolutely.
Right? Like, think about the Flames, right? They've been in limbo for however many years.
And just look at talent, the team that Toronto has assembled over the last 5 years, and even just look around the league. Look around the league, and it's really, really ironic and funny to say it, but they, in regular season contention, have been basically the model of consistency over the last 5 years. Like, teams like Tampa have changed who they have, like, across the whole roster. Teams like, I don't even know, Dallas, all of those guys. All of these teams that have basically had to pretty much design their entire team because guys have gotten old, guys have left, all of these reasons. Toronto and their core that they currently have right now is the one team that's still here. After all of this time, and it's hilarious because the farthest they've ever made it is the second round. And it's so odd. It is so crazy because every year they just do so well in the regular season and then just suck. And I mean, the year before this, we saw them make it to the second round. So I don't know whether
the Lightning.
They did beat the Lightning. That was a very good Lightning team too. Like, the Lightning are never an easy team to beat. I think
as part of that, I think their division works so much against them too. This stupid playoff format where they're going to be playing they're going to be playing the best teams. Where it's like, you look at the other division, you get the Rangers get to play the Capitals and the Hurricanes get to play the Islanders, and the Bruins, Leafs, Florida, Tampa, like I don't quite understand those matchups.
No.
Um, I almost look at this and say, so you say tear the roster down.
Yeah.
Which situation do you honestly prefer? Let's say Toronto tears their roster down to a certain extent. They get back in the playoffs in a couple years, and they sneak in as
Yeah.
like the last wild card team. Do you think that honestly might be better for them?
Yes.
Like, do you think they'd have a better chance to go
Without
farther
a
with the
shadow of a
lowered
doubt.
expectation?
As long as the team they're playing in the first round isn't Boston, I like their odds in that a lot more. I even if they're playing like I it's so hard for that team. They need to be the underdog because they're just not going to win when they are considered what they are. I think it would honestly be good for this team to blow up a little and be considered a mid-tier, maybe sneak-in team next year. I don't think that'd be that bad for them. I honestly think having a season just to kind of mellow and all that wouldn't be bad for them. The one last question I was going to ask you before we wrap up this segment here
Yeah.
was because I was kind of leading into it with my last point as well, and the fact that they obviously made it to the second round last year. Do you see what happened this year against Boston as more of a sign of the fact that you can never win with this core and nothing is going to change no matter how hard you try, or is it a relapse? Is it a relapse of old habits? But it doesn't mean that things are over. It doesn't mean that things are over. Last year or the year before, we saw that they can do something with it. We saw that there is something there before they ran into a very, very good Florida Panthers team that went to win the cup, or not win the cup, lose in the Stanley Cup Finals, right? Do you think it's more of a relapse, or do you think this core is done? You don't think they can win again?
I mean, based on like to go along with everything I've been saying so far, I do think it's just a relapse, and I think it's just like I think winning with this core is absolutely possible because again, the puck bounces a different ways. Samsonov makes a couple saves, and they're in the second round right now, when we're not even having this conversation. I mean, you can only lose in so many game sevens to just say like you have the worst luck of all time, and I do think it is. I do think it is more than that. I think it is the culture. I think it is something more that you can't necessarily quantify, but I don't think that necessarily means that you can't win with this core because I just think this core they've been given, this talent they've been given, isn't something to be taken for granted. And I think that's almost what the conversation around this team is doing, where it's like, oh, you got to get rid of Marner, you got to get rid of Tavares, you got to get rid of whatever. If they were on the decline in terms of overall production, including regular season, then I'd say sure, maybe you get something for them before they like get old or whatever. But that's not been the case. Like you've said, they've been the model of consistency. I I I just don't see the point of completely blowing it up at this point, other than just to maybe deliver a culture shock that may or may not work, considering how big of a problem the overlying thing is. I do think you generally just have to chip away at it until you eventually overcome the taboos one by one, right? I did think that was what was going to happen. They did it last year with the full first round win thing. That was a
Yeah.
20-year curse that they had. I thought they were going to do it this year against Boston. When they scored that first goal, I genuinely thought, I know naive of me, but I genuinely thought like, oh, this is the year they overcome the Boston curse too. But it didn't end up happening. But it doesn't mean they can't. Like I think we saw that last year, and I think as long as this core is still playing up to this same level in the regular season, I think you have to keep going at it, and I think you have to try to make improvements to keep cashing in on this core. And then at a certain point, if it just gets to the point where it's unsustainable, maybe you didn't get as much for them, then whatever. At least you tried to contend in the last couple of years of a one of the probably the most talented roster they've had in the last like
One of the
30
most talented,
years.
if not the most talented roster they've ever had. I mean, if you really want to compare it, like it's this team. I mean, you made a really good point earlier, and just the fact you put a different logo on this team's chest, they've won a cup. It's as simple as that. Like, and I and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that. Like, they seriously have had one of, if not the most talented group of at least forwards in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And and that either shouldn't be controversial or just straight up isn't. Like, it's just offensively they have all of the tools. It's no one can really figure out what the hell's the issue. And I mean, that's the same thing that we've been repeating over and over here. But yeah, I mean, to answer my own question, I think I am on the other side, just in the fact that when stuff like this happens, I've always been a big believer in just do something different, change something, right? Because I hate running it back when stuff like this is happening. So at least to me, if I was Treliving, I think I'm trading at least Marner and making another run at it. But I think you made a really good point as well in what you said there, and the fact that you do have time. You absolutely do have time here. It's not like any of these players are really going. Their value's not going to go down unless something miraculous happens and one of these players has a down year or something crazy in the regular season, which I don't know, isn't going to happen. To make a prediction, it's not going to. You have time. You can make another run at it without much consequence other than the sanity of all of your fans, probably. I do think you get rid of Marner, though. I think that would be my answer. You got to start doing something. You got to start at least do something that isn't just bringing in Ryan Reeves, bringing in Max Domi, bringing in all of these players that you brought in. Make a big change. Make a change that is legitimate and just shakes things up a little bit. And that's going to be tough for them. So, I mean, we'll have to see what Treliving decides to do, obviously. Whether that's potentially trading, Marner for Markstrom. That's a joke. That's a joke, Leafs fan. Don't yell at me. Don't yell at me. I see you in the comments. I see you down there. Do not come for me. I don't really know how we're going to do this. This is going to be a great time. But me and Caleb, we're sitting here before the podcast going, what the hell are we going to talk about? And then it popped into our brains. The disappointment we have felt watching players like Huberdeau, like Dubois, play all season long and just absolutely shit the bed on their $1 million contracts. Let's talk about it. Let's have a bit of a therapy session here for all of the teams, all fan bases to come together and complain about your most disappointing players, which is what we're going to talk about. I have a list in front of me made by Bleacher Report and Adam Gretz back on May 2nd. This is one that we have had sitting in the bench for about a week now. We thought about doing it last week, didn't end up doing it, so we're doing it here now. We're not going to do every team because that's a lot of people, and a lot of these aren't really worth talking about. We were kind of talking about it before. Caleb, you pitched the idea of giving every player kind of like a minute and giving it kind of just a speed run at it. The hard part with something like that is just the fact that, and it's the same thing I said to you, some of these players are worth talking about for quite a bit longer than a minute, and some of these really aren't. Some of these aren't even worth giving a minute to. So I'm going to kind of toss us all over the place here, I think. We're going to skip a few that they've got on this list, but we're going to start at the top anyway, because I think they do start with a really big one in the Anaheim Ducks and Trevor Zegras, which is a big one people have talked about plenty. Mainly because of the fact that, sure, he was hurt for a lot of the year, but even when he was playing, he just wasn't very good. And whether that's because he was playing hurt, whether that's just coming off injuries, are always tough, especially for younger players like Trevor Zegras. I think something that we can maybe talk about, throw it in there, make a prediction out of it. Caleb, if I'm going to toss it over to you before I even ask what you think about his kind of drop in production, do you think that there's a chance Trevor Zegras will turn things around next year? Or if this is just the player he is?
I think so. He's 23 years old, right? Like, I think the talent is still there. He's one of the most electrifying players that we had seen in a long time. I find it hard to believe that that's just a flash in the pan. Like you said, he's injured. He only played 31 games this year. So, like, didn't have much of a chance to prove himself. Like, players go through rough patches. And like you pointed out, if he's playing hurt for some of that stretch, it could explain the lack of production too. I just think you don't knock a kid like that at this point in his career. It was a disappointing season, but it's not something where I'm like overly concerned about his growth into a star like his projection were. It's disappointing, but I think there's a lot of other factors that can explain it to where I'm not overly concerned about like a huge drop off.
Yeah, and I think I have the same answer as well. I have never been a big fan of him. I've always thought he was a little overhyped, but that's not to say that I don't think he'll be a good player and a lot better of a player than he is here. I still think he has all the potential in the world to be point per game, and he has showed that many times. There's a lot of people who have expected a lot more than him from him, as in like evolving into a superstar. I got distracted because I saw two Santas sitting in the back of this photo, and it made me giggle a little bit in my head. If you look really, really close in this photo I have of Zegras on the screen, you can just see Santa. It got me very confused for half a second. Anyway, there's a lot of people who hyped him up to be this superstar player, which, I mean, the main point I'm trying to make, he's probably not going to be that. He makes electrifying plays like you've mentioned, like we've seen, like he was in that photo, right? He took that lacrosse move and made it his thing. That is the Trevor Zegras move at this point, right? I just don't think you can expect him to be. He's never going to be. If the Ducks start winning, he will not be the best player on that team. Is the main point I would make. I don't think he's that superstar player. I don't think he has the potential to do that. But I do think he's a lot better than he is right now, and I do think he's going to turn that around. But I think we can move on. Yeah. I think it's pretty clear both of us, like I mentioned, both higher on Trevor Zegras than he has shown this year. He'll turn it around. I think we can skip all the way down over to the Buffalo Sabres, who they have on this list as Peyton Krebs, who, honestly, I have not followed his season very much this year, but the fact that we haven't been hearing much about him, I think says more than anything else. Because if you really want to talk about the prospect that Peyton Krebs was at one point, he was a very, very big part of that Jack Eichel trade that sent him to Vegas, and obviously Krebs coming the other way in that trade. He was a very big prospect at one point, and so far he's made the NHL, and he's become a very okay player, but he's not what anybody thought he would be. So far last season, this season, whatever. He scored 4 goals, 17 total points in 80 games. Not great.
Yeah.
Not great. And he's still young. He's 23 as of right now. And yeah, I think this is one that's a bit more interesting than the Zegras one, to ask the question of whether you think he's going to turn it around. I really hope he does. I was a big fan of his game when he was a prospect, but I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this whole Buffalo roster is kind of one that's full of disappointments, right? Again, I can't specifically speak a lot to Krebs in terms of watching a lot of his game the last season, but in terms of just production, like I almost look at, I could look about 7 different ways of this roster. This is a team that we were looking at potentially making the playoffs, before the year, breaking their years-long curse, and didn't even come close to that. It's guys like Krebs not stepping up, but it's also like I'm honestly surprised they didn't go with a guy like Tage Thompson in this spot either, where he was projected to be that like superstar player, but did not make that kind of leap. 59 points in 71 games. Even I don't necessarily the most. Devin Levi as well. Although that one I think it was more of a one I'd chalk up to his first season in the NHL.
Oh no, and I agree with you. That's not me saying that I'm necessarily fully disappointed in it. I'm throwing him out there because of the hype behind Levi at one point. He was the biggest goalie prospect in the world, right? And there was a lot of excitement going into maybe more into the back end of the season than the start of the next one, if that makes more sense. I think it cooled down over the summer, but the hype around him was definitely there. And I think it's the same thing with Tage Thompson. Absolutely. That's another really good point. Because, yeah, this whole Buffalo team, I remember being very, very high on them at the beginning of the year for good reason. They have so much talent. They have so many very, very skilled young guys that really should have turned it around for them and just haven't yet.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It's definitely one of the ones where it's like you look back on, if you just rewatch our preview of it, just contrasting that with where we are now, it's just I don't know. Peyton Krebs is the scapegoat here in terms of this Bleacher Report article, but it goes way deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the fun one that I think we'll spend a little bit talking about, because this is the player from both of our teams in Jonathan Huberdeau, and it's the obvious one. When I read this headline, I was trying to figure out what the heck you were pointing at for a second there. But but when I read this headline, I thought Jonathan Huberdeau. He is the big name when it comes to this, because the Flames are paying him a ridiculous amount of money in $84 million over 8 seasons, and so far he has basically done jack all. If you, in a sense, he was, and say what you want about obviously the fact that he was in reality traded for Tkachuk, but in my head, and I think in a lot of Flames fans' heads, he was the Jonathan Gaudreau. Johnny Gaudreau. Jonathan. I was like, I don't know. I had like a brain cramp. I know. I had a brain cramp, and I thought about it for a second, and then I said it
that long.
I know.
Refer to him formally.
I know.
Jonathan Gaudreau.
Sir Jonathan. I had like a brain cramp where I said it and I went, that sounds wrong. And then I said it again. I was like, no, that sounds right. It's because we're talking about Jonathan Huberdeau. Whatever. It's too many Johns. Screw off, Johns.
Johnny Huberdeau.
We need to get all the Johns out of Calgary. Start a petition. Anyway, what I was gonna say is
maybe Huberdeau needs to change his name to Johnny.
Oh, there we go. That might do the trick. That might do
Johnny
the trick.
Huberdeau. Johnny Hubie.
Johnny Hubie. That does have a ring to it. Start that petition as well. Start both of them at the same time. But anyway, what I was going to say is, in a sense, he was the Johnny Gaudreau replacement. At least to a lot of Flames fans going into that first season he was here. He wasn't that at all. This season, he was arguably worse if you really look at the stats, which says a lot because he was really bad in that first year. I'd say he was less noticeable this season than he was in that first one, but he was... That's mostly because we got a lot more talented, I think, this year, especially in youth. There was a lot of things to look at other than John. I nearly said it again. Jonathan Huberdeau. There too many fucking Johnnies, man. There was a lot more things to look at on the ice, at least for us Flames fans. But, I mean, do you think there's a chance that we will ever see the Jonathan Huberdeau of old? The Florida Panthers Jonathan. The Jonathan we all need.
I don't know. That feels like... Because, I mean, I think the one knock against Huberdeau in Florida was that he was playing with fantastic line mates, right? And particularly Barkov.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like, it doesn't, he doesn't necessarily... And he's more of an, like a setup. Like, he's not going to be scoring a ton of goals, generally. His skill is in passing, and he needs a superstar beside him still even then. Like, I think generally, like, he's there to set up other players. I don't think he can survive. As we've kind of learned, I don't think he can survive as the sole superstar on his team. I think he needs that other presence, and I mean, I don't know if that's. I do think. Again, I didn't watch the Flames as closely as I normally did this year
for fair reason.
From what I generally saw, over the course of the season was that Huberdeau played better when he was put on a line with some of the up-and-coming young talent. I almost think that that's indicative of how it would go. And I think if he does ever have a bounce-back season, it's because another player has broken out and become a superstar on the Flames, whether that's one of the young prospects we have here or someone we pick in an upcoming draft. And I think that's the big thing there.
And to add on to that, I think what we've learned about Huberdeau, more than anything else, is that he... at least to me, he is the type of player who needs to be the second best player on his line. He is, and in my head, I compare it, and I think the comparison is a good one here, because he had, at least in Florida, he would have had a very, very similar role to this player. He's kind of your Nicholas Backstrom. You would never think of Nicholas Backstrom as that superstar who can carry his own team and be that number one guy, but he was perfect to play on a line with Ovechkin, right? It's the same thing here, where he was perfect when he wasn't the number one threat. Huberdeau was lethal when he was passing to Barkov, when he was passing to whoever the fuck they put on that line. And it worked. It worked perfectly. It was very, very good because he wasn't the number one guy on that line. People were scared of Barkov. When you're a defenseman on the ice and you're playing against Barkov, you're playing against Huberdeau, and they're in a power play or whatever the heck the situation is, you're not necessarily watching Huberdeau. He's the pass guy. He's the guy who's just there to pass it. You're watching Barkov, and that is when Huberdeau succeeds, when he is not the main focus. And the whole time he's been in Calgary, he's been the main focus, whether that be in the media, whether that be on the ice. It is a completely different situation for him, and he's struggled.
It's the pressure of A, living up to the contract, B, living up to the Tkachuk trade, which I think is a big thing, because I think, especially with the season that Tkachuk had in Florida, taking them all the way to the Cup Finals. And Tkachuk was, I think losing Tkachuk was when this team died, frankly. Because Tkachuk was the heart and soul of this team, where he would go out and fight every night, and even if the rest of the team was coming out
there. Can't be a party
saying,
every night, Caleb.
Every night. Yeah. Garbage. Like, he would be the one who, like, lived and died for this team, and to the point where he eventually had enough and said, I need out of here. I think that's when this team died. And Huberdeau could never match that. Like, I don't think Huberdeau, like, pound for pound, could never match the type of player Kachuk is, both in terms of skill, but most importantly, intensity and leadership.
And it's
A
crazy.
crime, like, it's a crime that Kachuk was never captain
Yeah,
of
that's
this
true.
team. I think that's maybe not necessarily the main reason as to why Huberdeau has been disappointing, but I think it's kind of an underrated,
And
like,
I
storyline amongst all of this.
and I do want to say I think a little bit of that is looking backwards because I do remember when Huberdeau came in, that contract looked fair. That trade
Yeah.
for Kachuk looked good. And in the skill department
It
of
looked very
replacing
good,
him,
especially with Uyghur too.
yeah, in the skill department of just replacing Kachuk one for one, at least to me, it didn't look bad. I know that I was a real big fan of that trade when it happened, and now looking back on it, it's not very good. And Uyghur has obviously been very good. That is not a sentiment to the player Uyghur has been. I think everybody involved has been very impressed with Uyghur, and he's turned into a big fan favorite here in Calgary.
Uyghur, honestly, even though Huberdeau is like gonna sink us with the contract, I still think that's an even trade relatively because Kachuk had made it public he wanted out. I was surprised we got anything for him. Yeah. Honestly, that was the big thing. We had no leverage.
Yeah, I think we should move on because we've got a lot of players on this list. That's the big one.
Huberdeau forever.
Exactly, and that was the big one. I promise you that will be the one we talk about for the longest here. I think we're gonna skip another few here in the fact just because they're not that interesting. The next one I think we should talk about is Colorado, where they have been very, very good across the board. You can talk about their offense. You can talk about their defense. The one gap they've had this season more than anything else is the man between the pipes in Alexander Georgiev. And it has been a very interesting situation for him so far in Colorado because there has been times where he's looked very good and there has been times when he looks like he should be a backup again. And so far he's been good enough for Colorado, at least in the playoffs when they were playing Winnipeg and who are they playing again? I'm completely blanking all of a sudden. Who are they playing in the second round?
Dallas.
There you go. Whatever. And we'll see how he looks against Dallas. But this is
nothing already.
Oh, well, that shows the rock I've been living under. But
Dallas was up 3-0, and they came back to win 4-3 in overtime.
When did that game happen? Was that yesterday?
That was a couple days ago, I believe.
Oh my God, Simon! Holy! I'm on vacation. Y'all got to give me a break. I was doing everything, but I've been watching. I had to watch a lot of hockey in the last 6 months, whether for this or for work. I've watched enough hockey. I was doing anything but watching hockey for the last couple days. Whatever. Obviously, he's going to be their starter in those games, and he has been the big story, I think, with Colorado, with their teams. I don't think it would have mattered if he was an average starter. I think even that would be a bit of a letdown because of the reason Colorado brought him in for. When he was backing up Shesterkin, he looked very, very good. He looked comparable. That duo looked comparable to Swayman and Allmark. And now that is absolutely not the case at all, which is very, very interesting, at least for me. I think my question for you is whether you think that Georgiev ever really was that type of elite goalie who can be not only just a good starter, but can be that next level goalie in the regular season, playoffs, what have you, or whether you think this is the Georgiev that he always has been. I guess is what I'm trying to say. This is
I just think it's a dangerous leap to make from projecting from backup to starter. I mean, it's something you're gonna have to do at some point, but I mean, to put all your chips in on the table on Georgiev in terms of what Colorado was doing, instead of bringing a guy up and who they've developed or bringing in a more experienced veteran like they did before in Darcy Kemper. I think there's still potential. I mean, I think he's still relatively young, is he not? There's always potential for
yes. Especially, I don't know how old he is, especially but he's relatively.
Especially with goalies where it's it's very volatile from year to year.
Yeah.
I think that anything can change in the blink of the eye, and obviously the more experience you get, I think the better you're going to get generally. I think the one thing I would say about him being like the most disappointing player in Colorado, not necessarily that I have a substitute, but I just don't
Yeah.
know like I know the expectations were relatively high coming in based on how he looked in New York, but
Yeah.
I don't know, like I feel like that even was unreasonable to begin with.
And that's fair. I Yeah. No, you make a good point there, and just expecting him to be that next top guy, but you got to realize where the hype was, right? Like, he was very, very much. I was a big fan of him. I can say that. I was definitely on that hype train of this guy is going to be great for the Avalanche. He's a massive upgrade, and he was good at points. But yeah, he's just. He has been also very bad at points, and that's been the big thing. I do think he'll turn it around. You made a good point. He's very young, and I have the same perspective on it. NHL goalies go up and down. It's way too early to give up on them. But I think if you've learned, and if I'm Colorado, I've learned anything, especially if they go out to Dallas in this round, I think you got to look at maybe getting either a very, very good veteran backup or a player or a back veteran who could even potentially give him a run for the starting job, just to either spook him into playing better or just have that backup
Yeah.
just in case. The next one up here is another very, 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 very good one to talk about, I think, because it's been a story for the last 2 years, same as Huberdeau. There's been a lot of people comparing him in Sir Jonathan Gaudreau over in Columbus.
No, that's not okay. Yep.
Who
Yep.
did you have?
I thought we were gonna get to a different player first, but
Oh yeah, well there is another comparable, but yeah, this is the when you talk about the two, the two Jonathans of the league, because that is what we call them both.
two
Obviously.
Johnnies.
The two Jonathans, the two Sir Jonathans. It is Johnny Gaudreau and Jonathan Huberdeau, and obviously there's a lot of reasons to compare them. One went in, one came out, and of Calgary as that is, and both have sucked ever since. And it's been very weird with Johnny Huberdeau or Johnny.
You're cursed with this segment.
I am. I am. Holy
I
smokes. Johnny Gaudreau. Holy crap. I need another cup of
He
coffee.
played here for 10 years.
I know. Oh, it's whatever. Johnny Gaudreau has been a very interesting case, especially in the last couple of years here, because it's almost stranger than Huberdeau, because if you compare the two players, even before the drop off, I would have told you that I would expect Gaudreau to be the player out of the two to be able to succeed on a worse team. Because when you just look at it on who can create for themselves, who's the better scorer, all of those things, Johnny Gaudreau hits the mark. He was that guy. There was multiple seasons in a row where he was one of the best in the NHL for entering the zone with the puck, and was arguably one of maybe behind McDavid and McKinnon as the best puck carriers, period. And all of a sudden he turned into a 12-goal scorer in 2 years. And it's a very, very interesting situation where I think the only thing we can blame is Columbus and Ohio.
Yeah.
Blame Ohio. Yeah. There we go. That's the answer. Ohio ruined Johnny Gaudreau for all of us, and now we don't get to watch him dipsy doodle and dangle through the neutral zone and score on non-expecting goaltenders. We can move on. Let's just blame Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, well, I do think that's honestly it, right? In terms of like, I think you put him anywhere else that's even a little bit better and in a little bit bigger of a market than Columbus, and I think it's really not that big of an issue, because I mean his point production, while it's gone down significantly, especially from his last season with Calgary, it's still like he's still producing like the year before almost at a point per game. This year a little bit down, but still like 60 points isn't like terrible or anything.
Nope.
A 12 goal scorer obviously not ideal, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's just completely and fully situation on this. Like
yeah,
it's
he's also
still
on a
the
team that's
most
not contending at all.
Yeah, it's still the most like confounding free agency decision that I think I've ever seen in any sport ever, in terms of the choice that a player made. Because Calgary loved him. Calgary was going to pay him more money. Even though Calgary hasn't been very good, I think
we all thought Calgary was going to be good. That's the difference, right?
Yeah, and I think they would have been better because you still maybe Gaudreau would have been that superstar that you could pair with Huberdeau, and maybe Huberdeau plays better, right? In terms of like expounding on that conversation
exactly,
we just
right?
had.
Like,
I
I think the main difference is let's say in a magical world where Goudreau stayed, right? We still would have made that Huberdeau trade. The only difference that I can really think of is we wouldn't have gotten Kadri because we never would have been able to clear that cap. I think
Yeah.
so. In a way, you could basically say Kadri in, Goudreau, or other way around. Kadri out, Goudreau in. That's the only thing that changes. I think that's a very different team because Goudreau would be
It's a
coming
much
off
better team.
the best season he's ever had as a scorer and just as a passer all across the board. He'd be playing with Huberdeau, who is coming off, I think, also the best season he's ever had. And it's the same thing that I mentioned to you. Huberdeau can't be that number one guy. He wouldn't be. Goudreau is that number one guy. He's the puck carrier. He's all that. I think we're
And Gaudreau would
and
be
it's
familiar
so
with
and
everything,
it's
though, too.
it's so crappy to think about because then I just start banging my head against the table at what we could have had. Johnny, why you have to leave, buddy? We would have been so much better
It just
off.
didn't make any
And it's
sense. With
no, it doesn't. Yeah, it absolutely
Calgary
doesn't.
paying more money, and also like his reasoning was to be closer to home, but like I believe his family was in Philly,
Yeah.
and he wasn't sign. He didn't sign with Philly when
He
I
wanted
believe
to.
that was on the table.
Philly
It
shut it
doesn't
down.
make any sense.
Philly
Shut it down.
Philly came outright and said they didn't want him.
I don't remember that as much, but
I do.
I guess
'Cause
I guess if that happened, that makes more sense.
Because the reason I remember that is because when that happened, pretty much everyone here, I think that was our sign of like, whew, we're good. That was the one thing with Goudreau is like he wanted to maybe go to New Jersey, he wanted to go to Philly, and Columbus was in the background, but that didn't really become as big of a storyline as until it happened, obviously. But the big story was Philly, whether Philly was going to get him, and Philly did not want to pay the price that Johnny wanted. The only team that was really willing to pay Johnny the ridiculous amount of money he wanted, funnily enough, was Calgary. Even Columbus was a downgrade in money. And yeah, it is really, really crazy now looking at it where Johnny has basically just become, I don't know, he's become the best player. He's playing next to Line as well, who could have also made this list in looking at the player he used to be compared to what he is now. So it's yeah. Columbus as a team has been a very, very, very funky team for a little while here. I think we should try and speed up, and I think it'll be a little bit easier with the second half of this list. Ville Husso, this one, I cannot say I watched many Detroit games, but I believe it based on how bad Detroit was this year, despite my own expectations. I had them winning the cup because I got caught up on the hype train that was Detroit because they looked very, very good. And it's really, really unfortunate because the one thing I do remember saying in that segment was the fact that if they were going to become the player or the team that everybody expected them and wanted them to be, they need good goaltending. They needed Ville Husso to turn into that player he was for St. Louis in those runs, and he wasn't at all. He really just didn't develop. He just wasn't good, and that is the unfortunate thing, I guess. I mean, so far with the Red Wings, they even have the stats here to throw them at you quick. 895 save percentage over 75 appearances in 2 years. That's just bad. Like there was
none of that is great, and I think that was the concern. I think it's similar to Georgiev, right? Where it's like projecting someone with limited starting time to be your secured number one goalie. I think that it causes an issue, right? Where it puts this extra pressure on, especially as a team that's expected to contend. There's that extra pressure that's not necessarily. I don't think it's good for a goalie's development, and I don't think it's necessarily good for the team either, right? I think. I don't know where they go from here in terms of if they have, because who else do they have, aside from Husso that they, started this year?
Oh,
because I think it means generally they have to find.
I thought they signed another guy, but I don't remember. Not as a starter.
Yeah.
They don't have anyone who
Alex
can really
Lyon?
start.
Alex Lyon.
Yes, that is it. Was he in Detroit before? I don't remember.
He was in Florida.
Oh, that's right.
He was in Florida.
Yes. Nope, you're absolutely right. Yeah, well, yeah.
Where
I
guess he basically got them in.
Yeah.
And because here's the breakdown. Actually, this is interesting in terms of Husso was immediately kind of ousted, where he only played 19 games. James Reimer played 25, and Alex Lyon played 44.
Yeah.
And yeah, Huso played a lot worse than either of those guys.
Yeah.
I think Lyon has proven himself to be a pretty good goalie. Obviously, the
Yep.
stretch with Florida, like Florida wouldn't have had their run without him.
Well,
But I think you got to try to find a more permanent addition at goalie. And but again, the position is so volatile; it's hard to even know what that would look like.
I think what we've learned is Detroit does not have the defense that we once thought they had. I think there is also a conversation there because when you have 3 goalies show up and all suck, that's not necessarily a sign that your crease is haunted by the ghosts of goalie past. It's usually a sign that your defense is bad and your team just isn't doing a good job defending them.
But
Or what?
but
I'll let
still,
you go.
that isn't necessarily a good three-headed goalie tandem if you're pulling
That's
out
fair.
like the 38-year-old corpse of James Reimer to
Yeah.
start a lot of games for you.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that both Lyon and Huso have been shown to be good enough. Sure. Yeah, like they both have shown before that behind good defense, they have been good. Behind a Detroit Jesus, I need more coffee. Behind a Detroit team that we all thought would be very good this year, all they showed us is they're not that. They can't be that starter. I think if you're Detroit, you have to be looking for potentially a new guy or at least somebody to add to that trio because like you pointed out, you don't hate Lyon. You think that he's a good goalie. I don't hate Huso. I think he's shown to be a good goalie in the past. I think either of those guys in the future, if things turn around for them, could be a starter for this Detroit team. But you don't really want to run it back with the same duo that just basically lost to a year. And I think, yeah. No, I think it's just exactly that. I think you got to try and bring somebody new into that core, and we'll see what they end up doing with it. The nice thing is, the next team also has a goaltending issue here in the fact that we'll be talking about the Edmonton Oilers and Jack Campbell, the Soup Man. The Soup Man sucked this year. I think he even sucked in the AHL. And yeah, I mean, he's so far. Oh, wow. I did not know it was this bad, actually. In his 2 years with Edmonton, Campbell has had an .886 save percentage in 41 appearances.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize it was that terrible. I think the Oilers are very lucky that Stuart Skinner pretty much popped off out of nowhere here because if he didn't just make his appearance at the NHL level, they'd be in a very bad spot. And yeah, he's been an interesting guy to follow.
So here's it. Do you want some Jack Campbell? Not breaking news. This was a while ago. But Jack Campbell relevant news. In the middle of the first round against LA was the first time he had gotten called up from the AHL since November.
Yep.
Well, been in the AHL the entire season.
And that's mainly because Stuart Skinner was not impressive in that first half of this series against LA. In the second half, he's solid. He looked a lot better. I still don't think he's anything better than an average goaltender, but he's good enough for this Edmonton team, which is what we've seen.
Yep. But Campbell has been, I mean, it's a albatross for contract too, where they paid him a boatload of money. And I think the thing with Campbell has always been where you can just like visibly see him getting in his own head, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where he will have
he played in
a
Toronto.
Streaky goalie.
Right? He is
exactly.
The perfect goalie
I think
for
the specter of Toronto.
Exactly. Actually, yeah, that's what I was about to say. He pretty much perfectly reflects all the same issues that Toronto has. The fact, and which is exactly why it never seemed smart to give him that contract that the Oilers did, but
no.
The only reason it's worked out for them so far,
Toronto.
I mean, they're paying their if you include all of their goaltenders, and I think we've brought this up multiple times, at least in the fact of whenever the rumor of Markstrom going there, that stupid one that's popped up every once in a while. Whenever that's come up, my argument has always been between their 3 goalies that they have kind of have rotated in, they're paying all of them, I think, like $10 million. Why would you want to add another $6 million on top of that? It just doesn't make any sense. And I mean, what we've seen so far is that obviously they probably don't need it. I think you just stick with Stuart Skinner in the future. Even if I'm not that high on him as a goaltender, I think it's still a better option than Campbell or even trading for Markstrom.
Well, how do you get out of Campbell's contract? I think
you don't.
The big thing,
you don't. You just let that albatross of a deal sit there because nobody wants him.
Yeah, it was a questionable decision at the time.
You know what? If somebody would have wanted him,
played up to.
if somebody would have wanted
He
him,
had played up to
he
that
would have
level,
gotten picked up off waivers.
right? Like this year, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
my
that's
Siri just
Did something happen? Are you good?
shut up. I don't know if you can still hear me or not.
Yeah. I mean, you're a little glitchy. I was gonna say that's
Okay,
probably
there we
a good moment to move on here because I scrolled further down this list that we have going here. We really gotta get moving here. Florida Panthers, Aaron Ekblad. Do you want to try and do the 1 minute thing just for the memes?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
Here we go. 1 minute. Thoughts on Aaron Ekblad sucking?
Not necessarily that I have all that much to say about Aaron Ekblad this year. I believe he was kind of like this because if we're kind of going 1 minute as of now. I believe he was injured last year. Don't have time to fact check that, but I think coming off the injury was a big thing. I think in terms of him taking a step back, I think that would be the biggest thing. It's honestly not something that I've heard all that much about, which I could probably attribute to the fact that Florida as a team has just been so good that it would overshadow any struggles that he's had. Yes. I don't think that's for these good teams. It's kind of hard to find a disappointing player.
Nope, and I agree with that. Aaron Ekblad, incredible defenseman, very, very good. We've seen his talent multiple times. The big issue has always been injuries, and this is another season that has just quickly gone destroyed by injuries for him. And he'll absolutely bounce back. I've been very high on Ekblad ever since he's entered the league, and I still think that he has all the potential in the world to someday, as long as injuries don't derail that, win a Norris. And I fully am okay with making that prediction because I'm very high on him. Next one, LA Kings, Pierre-Luc Dubois. What could we say that has not already been said about this guy? Got an absolute stupid deal for a ridiculous amount of money that, honestly, even at the time, did not look like a smart deal to be made. They made it anyway, and now the LA Kings are stuck basically paying this guy who I don't think ever had the potential to live up to that contract, this insane deal. So to be honest with you, I do think he is a better player than 40 points in 82 games, but I don't think he's better than maybe 70. So that is what I'd say. I expect him to get back there, but past that, no.
That trade, like, it was a clear loss because I think that trade just revitalized the Jets too. Like I think it's a big reason why they had the season that they did is the return they got for Dubois, and now the conversation around Dubois is just because when you're giving up that much, you're expecting him to be a superstar, and I don't think he's ever been that. There's been potential for that, but he's never been that. Now the conversation is, will they buy him out or not?
Yeah.
They say they won't, but even to be having that conversation is concerning.
Yeah, and those power forwards are really, really tough. We're running a little bit over a minute, but I'll say this right at the end. Power forwards like him are really, really tough to measure the potential of because so many of them are never really going to be those top scorers or like best players on the team unless they are really, really elite of a power forward, and he was never that type of talent. When I say really elite, I mean Jerome McGinley, I mean Joe Thornton, I mean those kind of players who are like all-time elite level players. Jamie Benn as another one to throw in there. And even I'd say he's the bottom that you can have to really be able to carry a team. And Dubois was never going to be that type of player. We can move on. Next one up here. I'll skip a few down. Nashville Predators in Saros. And this one's a really interesting one.
Oh,
because
I don't understand throwing that one up on the list. Like I didn't think he struggled.
Well, I mean, he had a worst year compared to what we're used to seeing of Saros. He still had a .906 save percentage, but I think a lot of people were still expecting him to have an elite season, and he didn't have that. I think he was really good in that first round series against Vancouver. Yeah, he was stellar. So I think in that sense,
doesn't change my opinion of him.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say
some of these it is just kind of like you find not every most disappointing player is created equally, right? Because you have your Hubertos and your Jack Campbells, but Jack Campbell and Jussi Saros being on this list like kind of portrays them as being equal, but that really isn't the case here.
Yeah,
like he is a big reason why Nashville made it to the playoffs in the first place, right? Yeah. They were one of the worst teams in the league throughout the first month or two of the season, and you don't get to the point where they did without a good goaltender.
I firmly believe that pound for pound, Saros is one of, if not the best most skilled goaltenders in the league. He is so talented for a goalie who stands at 5'11", and I think that I've always loved watching him play. I think he's so athletic. He's so, I don't know. I think out of all the goalies in the NHL, he's one of the most entertaining to watch. I fully think he'll bounce back. I've been a big fan of him for a while. So, yeah, I'm excited to see what he does at least next season. I think as long as Nashville even retains a little bit of the team they've had this last season and skill and performance, I think he'll easily bounce back. Okay, this one's a little bit of a bigger one, I'd argue. I mean, although it's the same sort of argument that you can make here, it's a very similar conversation, is what I mean. Sorokin with the New York Islanders. He was very, very elite and very incredible throughout the for like 2 years in a row. And this season, there was a big drop off, and he ended up losing his starting job in the playoffs to Varlamov.
Yeah.
So I'm just.
This feels a lot bigger than the Saros stuff.
Really? Okay. Why?
Just in terms of what you just said, in terms of him losing his starting spot to Varlamov in the playoffs. I think a couple of years ago that was like pretty much unthinkable, where he was being spoken about in almost the same breath as like Saros and Shesterkin. It was starting to look like that almost.
Well, he was that. Not even looking like it. He was that.
Yeah. He was that for like you said, a year or two. Yeah. And it's almost to the point where I think, because again, I wasn't as locked in on the NHL this year. It was just like it just kind of came as a shock to me. It's like Sorokin isn't starting. Like,
yeah,
what happened to him? And it's much more of a noticeable thing.
I also want to point out the fact that a big reason behind that is because of he still had a season save percentage of .908 to really put something on top of it, which isn't bad, but compare it to the .924 that he had the season before, it's a pretty that's more hefty, right? And I think a lot of the reason behind him losing that starting job was the fact that Varlamov was playing very, very well. And I don't know if I don't know. I've always been a big fan of Sorokin. I think it's just he needed a down year, like every other goaltender. Just like Vasilevsky had a down year, right? Whether that be because of injuries or what have you. You can go down the list of all these elite goaltenders who haven't played as well this season. Out of all of them, for example, Saros, Sorokin, I'd put both of them on the same board of I fully expect Sorokin to bounce back. No issue. I think he's so insanely talented.
Not saying that he doesn't.
Yeah.
I just think this one is more noticeable than, or more significant than something like Saros. Not saying I don't think he'll bounce back, just because I think the position is so volatile in general.
Yes. Yeah. I think we can move on. The next one here is another one that if we weren't doing the minute thing, I probably would have sat here and talked about it for 10 minutes because I think it's so crazy, is Kaapo Kakko for the New York Rangers, who didn't have a very good season despite the fact that, and everyone, even I remember, you got to think of the hype with this kid, right? When he first got drafted, he was basically shined up to be one of the top two players of the future with the Rangers, in him and Lafreniere. They were going to be the future for the Rangers, and neither of them have really been that incredible. And I think I don't have Kakko's stats in front of me. I might try and find them real quick. All I know,
I'll find them. I've got them. Kakko had, oh boy, how bad was he? He had in 61 games, 13 goals, 6 assists, 19 points.
Yeah, rough. And I think, considering the expectations for him going into the league as the next great real sniper, right? Like, you got to think about it like that. He was expected to basically come in and shoot the lights out, and has never scored more than 18 goals, is just insane. I think people have just been waiting for him to show up, and I still have hope. He's still young. He's still got time. But the window's closing, I think. At least time-wise.
Yeah. It's crazy how the Rangers were able to do as well as they have this season, and just in general in the last couple of years, with their young players not necessarily working out to the extent people thought they would.
It just shows the veteran team that they have.
Yeah, it's a great team, and imagine how good because they won the President's Trophy, but think of how much better they would even be with those players working out. And I mean, I think that not to give props to Lafreniere, I think he's slowly been improving his game. Even this year, he played a full season, 57 points. not anything world breaking, but not anything terrible either. I think he's been slowly improving, but certainly not up to what you would expect yet of a first overall pick. I think you're right for
and
both
the hype.
Kako and Lafreniere.
He
and
was
hype.
he
I
was
think,
probably the most hyped up first round pick or first overall pick since McDavid. And maybe Matthews.
Yeah, that was that. Yeah, well, that I think was more of a you thing too. I think you were the person I was like,
I was
you were
so
the
high
highest
on
the Frenier out of. Yeah.
Well, because everything.
This kid's the next McDavid.
Well, no, I never said McDavid. I said Crosby. That's what I said. Because I want to make the difference between the two of them clear.
Oh yeah,
because the reason I said that is because when going into I could fight this till the day I die, because as a prospect he was so fucking fun to watch. He was so good. He had his hockey IQ just seemed like it was absolutely insane. Like, and it's, at least to me, when I look at when I want to name a prospect that shows that nobody is a sure thing, Lafreniere is that guy. Because as a prospect, he looked like a sure thing. He looked like that guy that was going to come into the league and just instantly dominate, because he didn't have the issue of being small for the NHL level. Had the size, no issue there. He had the head for it. He absolutely had that hockey IQ to instantly come into and he had the team. The Rangers were, I believe, they had just started to really stack up that veteran talent. So at least for me, it really sucks to see he never turned it around. And like you pointed out, he's slowly gone better, but he's shown that he's not quite the talent we, especially me, thought he was going to be. But yeah, we can keep moving on here. Do you feel like talking about Jacob Chychrun in Ottawa?
I don't know how much I can say on Chychrun.
Okay. The next one is probably Vasilevsky with Tampa. Yeah, he's more interesting just in the fact of, obviously, injuries played a huge part in it. Before this season, he had been the one goalie that had really never had like a misstep in his career so far. Like, I remember I think we compared him to like Hellebuck in that sense a little bit when we were talking about Hellebuck potentially getting moved, in the sense of in a position that is so volatile and there's so much movement and
those were the two guys.
Those were the two guys. And this was the first season that we saw Vasilevsky really take a misstep. And funnily enough, Hellebuck in the playoffs took his misstep, if you really want to look at it like that.
Yeah, although according to him, it's the best hockey he's ever played in his career.
That was a weird statement for him to make. But, because he really didn't look it. But anyway, this is the type of thing where I immediately go, cool, he wasn't good this year. He'll be good for the next 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think if you were to come out and say anything otherwise, I would call you an idiot. And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah. If I am to play devil's advocate to it a little bit, I don't think
okay.
I can only go so far with this take, because I don't think Vasilevsky's going to drop off.
I think I know the exact take you're going to make. Go nuts.
But I think that it will it'll be like he will still play well, but this Tampa team in general, I think, is on a downswing, because now you don't know what's going to happen with Stamkos. That whole core is kind of falling apart. And I just could see Vasilevsky kind of fade into the background of more so as the team starts missing the playoffs. Not necessarily that he'll get worse,
I don't know about that.
Like, it'll be clear that the peak of his career was behind him. That is my devil's advocate take.
Okay, you know what's funny? I thought you were going to go further with that by saying that because Tampa's defense and overall team will be a lot worse next year, he might not bounce back as much. I thought that's what you were going to say, which I would argue by simply saying, no. That's not going to happen. I don't think out of all the goalies in the league, I would argue Vasilevsky is one of, if not the only one, that I fully believe can carry an incredibly mediocre Tampa team to the playoffs, as long as they have something.
Yeah.
Like, I think that he's just that kind of goalie, and I think he has shown me nothing. I don't care what happened this year, until anything else happens otherwise, to show me otherwise. That's just the side I'll be on, because I think he's probably the most talented goalie, if not maybe top 2, top 3. And if that's a controversial statement to you, then I'm sorry, but that's I don't think it shouldn't be. Yeah, I don't think it should be. The next one is kind of the opposite. I have the opposite opinion on this one. Toronto Maple Leafs, Ilya Samsonov. I feel like this wasn't surprising at all.
This is my problem with this list in general. Yeah,
yeah, this
like,
wasn't
I don't think
surprising.
that was disappointing at all. I mean, if you go for the Leafs, I mean, I don't necessarily. I guess I can't pick anybody off the top of my head that had a more disappointing season. You could Marner in the playoffs, maybe. I don't know.
I thought Morgan Riley had a bit of a down year. I could be wrong.
Even then, I don't know how many people were expecting Samsonov to be any good. Like,
yeah,
I mean, it's kind of the thing. It's the same thing where it's just like career backup kind of thrust into the starting role.
Yes.
I think you always have to be
no.
a little bit kind of hesitant in that regard. I don't know.
Oh no, he didn't. I Morgan Riley didn't.
Yeah, I think even the most optimistic Leafs fans would have had some doubts about Samsonov going into the year. I don't know. I think I even compare that to what they did the year before that in like Matt Murray, where I think that was more of a fiasco, and that could be classified as way more of a disappointment compared to what the expectations were before the start of the year. Samsonov was just like, he was okay. Like, Samsonov wasn't bad, I don't think. He was okay. Like, he's very mediocre, and that's, if you had expectations higher than that, I think you needed to readjust your expectations.
Yes. And I remember when Samsonov first came into the NHL, and there was a lot of hype behind him to become one of the next elite goaltenders. He was the big reason Holtby left the Capitals, right? Because the Capitals wanted to make room for him. And then, obviously, for the Capitals, he was good-ish. He was fine. He was never elite. He was good enough, right? And he came to Toronto, and he was good enough, right? I think that is what I describe him as for the most part. Like I said in our Toronto segment that'll be right before this, and for anybody watching this, just the segment alone, you can find that on the YouTube channel. Whoa. But I'll say the same thing. I'll just echo myself in the fact that I just think Toronto needs a better goaltender as a whole. I think they should be that team looking for an elite goaltender, because that is the one thing that they really just haven't had. They have had great defense. They've had great offense. They've never had elite goaltending in all the years they've contended. Yeah. I think if they are going to change anything, it should probably be that. We can move on, though, unless you... Yeah, okay. This next one is a very interesting one. I actually did not follow his season this year, but thinking about it makes a lot of sense because of the season he had before and all the hype that was around him with the Kraken in Matty Beniers, who had a quite major sophomore slump after the rookie season he had, in 15 goals, 37 points. I don't think I heard his name all season long, and I guess I just didn't think about it. But yeah, he very much fell off. I mean, it's not that bad. It's not a bad situation. There's a reason that the sophomore slump has kind of been trademarked in pretty much every league, because it's a lot easier as a rookie to come in and not really be the big... There's not a lot of expectations, right? Like, whether it is just a score, you're not being expected to be the thing that drags your team to the playoffs. And then when you have that good year, you come back the second year, you know what the expectations are. And he didn't meet them this year. That's the obvious thing. Yeah. But I think he'll turn it around. He's very, very talented. I'm sure you've probably watched more Kraken hockey than I have, especially in that first season. But I don't know. At least to me, whenever I've heard his name, I've always thought that he was gonna be a pretty good player, and I don't know. This season doesn't change.
It was, again, like you said, it's a sophomore slump. I don't think there's, like you just said, I don't think that changes that. I think as for the Kraken as a whole this year, it was kind of a regression to the mean. Like, I think last season was a bit of an aberration in terms of the roster wasn't as talented as the Colorado team, but they still beat them in the first round.
Yeah.
And they still competed against, like, I believe it was Dallas. Like, they had a very good postseason run. And while I still think they're a good team, I think this is kind of more so what you would expect from them, where they still are a recent expansion team. They still don't necessarily have that superstar player. In terms of talent, Beniers might be that guy, because otherwise you're looking at guys like Jared McCann as your point leaders. and they don't have near the talent as Matty Beniers. But I do think it's just about trying to surround him with more talent. As the seasons kind of pile on here to say like, keep building, like keep going. Like he's a young player. I think he'll get better. It's a sophomore slump. It's not something I'm going to read into all that much. And you just hope they get back to the place they were a year ago.
Yeah, no, and I do agree with you on that one. I think he's probably the last real interesting one that I would say we need to highlight. The last other one that I'd really, you know what, we'll talk about this one real quick. Minute. Adin Hill, Vegas Golden Knights. That's probably the last one.
That's an interesting one.
It is an interesting one because a big part of it, I believe, was injuries, right? Because I think he did get hurt at some point there, if I remember right. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not reading anything but injuries here, so maybe I am wrong. Maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Who knows? But what I will say is, obviously, he did have a drop-off, which should have been expected, I think. Especially just when you look at it as he was a goalie who really was only exceptional in the playoffs for Vegas. And a big part of that could be attributed to how good of a defense Vegas overall has. So, at least to me, when I look at this, I would say I was definitely on the side of that I still expected Adin Hill to be a very good player this season. I didn't think he'd drop off as much as he did, but it doesn't surprise me that it happened.
He wasn't necessarily bad. Save percentage 9.
No.
0.909.
But who else would you point out on Vegas? Right?
In terms of
being disappointing. Other than maybe like
Yeah. I think that's the thing. And in terms of like expectation, because disappointment all about, like we talked about this whole segment, expectations versus actual. The expectations couldn't have been higher because of the playoff run, right? Like where the hype was just so high. It's not necessarily like some of these other goalies. I'm like, really, what did you expect? I'm like,
yes,
that's fair that
absolutely.
you expected that, but I don't think it was ever possible to live up to the amount of hype, even if those expectations at the time seemed realistic. And I also think it is important to note that it can seem like he took a step back just because he's shared the crease more with another really good goalie in Logan Thompson.
Yeah. And we knew that was going to be the thing going into this year as well. In the goaltending competition,
yeah, exactly.
Between the two
that's
of them.
Not necessarily unexpected. The only reason Logan Thompson wasn't playing more in the playoffs is because he got hurt.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. No, absolutely. I think that's it. I don't think we need to talk about the other guys. It's Darcy Kemper with the Capitals, which, I mean, he just played bad. I never was that high on Kemper as a whole. And Logan Stanley with the Winnipeg Jets, which is a very funny one to me because I never would have thought to see him on a list like this because honestly, I don't remember the last time I would have even heard his name. So there you go. That is it. That is our coverage of all the most disappointing players in the NHL this year. I don't know how to wrap this up really because there wasn't really a big lesson to take from this other than the fact that I hope that Jonathan Gaudreau turns things around.
Yeah. I believe this is the first time we've ever done a sequel to one of our more successful segments.
We're calling it a sequel.
Maybe it's not a direct sequel, but it's a spiritual sequel.
Yes.
Because we look at a certain team in the NFL, and we look at their quarterback battle going into training camp, and we say, uh-oh, that doesn't seem too fun.
Smells all too familiar.
Yeah. Last year was Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask, which was the first video that ever really got any sort of traction on our channel. People love the Trask talk.
I was gonna, So we're bringing it back.
But, oh yeah.
Trask talk, and that, baby.
We love the Trask talk.
Oh yeah.
We'll spit out like a 20-minute segment on Kyle Trask.
Yes, we should.
I'm sure he's making that backup money. I'm sure he's doing
true.
just
Is
fine.
He's still on the Bucks.
I would be shocked if he wasn't.
Yeah.
But either way, Baker Mayfield eventually won that QB battle, but quite significantly. Ended up having a fantastic season, making it to the Pro Bowl, I believe. I don't have time to fact check that.
I think so. He either made it or he was very, very close.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he made it to the Pro Bowl. Either way, the big conversation now is in terms of quarterback battle, it looks really iffy. Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell on the Raiders. because the Raiders were in a very interesting situation leading up to the draft, where you think they're probably going to take a quarterback at 13, most likely Michael Penix, until the Falcons say, "Uh-oh, you're not doing that because we have some weirdo shit to do." So not only the Raiders don't get a quarterback, they also they not only don't get Penix, but they don't get a chance to draft any quarterbacks at all. With the Broncos taking Bo Nix at 6, and then the top 6 quarterbacks are gone before the Raiders even have a chance to pick. They end up going with Brock Bowers. So this is a spot where many people thought that there was going to be a quarterback. Like, when people saw the Raiders sign Minshew, it's like, oh, it's going to be a backup to whoever they bring in. But now it's actually looking like the battle coming out of camp is between last year's starter Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And in fact, there was a recent quote by Las Vegas's assistant GM Champ Kelly, who said, quote, "The work that Aiden did last season towards the end of last year, we're excited about his growth and what he's going to be able to do going into year 2, but also excited about his competition. It's going to be a really good competition." Now, it's interesting. Aiden O'Connell, I think, did better than you could expect out of a 4th, 5th round pick, whatever he was.
Yeah.
But there's a reason people didn't expect this to be the competition. Do you think any of these guys, either of these guys, Minshew or O'Connell, has a chance to have that kind of Baker Mayfield breakout year where we'll look back at the segment and say, like, oh man, this was more obvious than we thought?
Well, and this would have been a really, really good segment, I think, looking back on it a little bit, to have Josh on, because I would have been curious to hear his opinion on it, as somebody who I believe, I'm pretty sure Josh watched most of the Raiders games last year, and just as a fan's opinion of Aiden O'Connell potentially being the starter of the future now, you're pretty much saying that. Him or Minshew, right? Maybe not Minshew, maybe not the future, but if Aiden O'Connell really, really has like a breakout year this season, you got to think he's your guy, right? I think the eyes should be on O'Connell more than Minshew. I think you really, really got to hope that O'Connell blossoms under the pressure here a little bit, because at times I know a lot of Raiders fans were pretty high on him, potentially being their next big guy, and I think this is his, in a sense, really his last real chance, because you know what you're going to get out of Minshew at this point. There's not really a lot of doubt. Yep, we know what ceiling is, and we know what the floor is with Minshew. And I think that if the Raiders want Minshew to be their starter for their mediocre team for the next couple of years, he can be. And he's not going to have much issue with that. I think he'll give the Raiders enough reason to give him a mediocre contract. And yeah, I think he's going to be fine here. I do think out of the two, Aiden O'Connell is the one player we haven't seen the ceiling of. And he is the guy who a lot of Raiders fans are a lot higher on. So at least for me, I definitely side on giving a lot more leeway to O'Connell, because of the fact that I don't necessarily think you need to test Minshew as much. But what do you think?
I would go against you just to say, in terms of just strictly, like, I agree with you in terms of, obviously, you're right. We know who Minshew is at this point, whereas O'Connell is a little bit more of an unknown commodity, and it has a little bit more promise. In terms of who's winning this battle straight out of camp, though, I think it has to be Minshew. They gave him, like, an amount of money to come to them, where it's not just, like, backup money. They gave him, like, starter
and just
money.
To throw it in there as well, I'm not necessarily saying that I think O'Connell's the better quarterback out of the two, because I want to say that I absolutely think it is Minshew, but I'm just talking about in what you gotta hope happens, I guess, more than anything.
No, that's true, and that I concede that. I just think I don't necessarily know if he's going to be given that chance. Gardner Minshew is on a 2-year, $25 million contract with the Raiders, which is not insignificant. Like, that's a decent chunk of change. I think that kind of shows what they think about him. And he had a good season for the Colts. Like, it was impressive what he was able to do. Richardson only played, like, the first, 3 or 4 games before he got hurt? So Minshew was, like, the driving force between the Colts almost making it to the playoffs. All this hype around the Texans, but if the Colts win that close game at the end of the year, where it was a while ago, but I believe it was the fact that it was a dropped pass. Like, it was not Minshew's fault that the Colts missed the playoffs. It was a drop pass on a 4th and whatever, and that's the difference between the Colts making it to the playoffs over the Texans, who are the belle of the ball right now. I think that Minshew, I think this has always been the thing with Minshew. He does have a lot of talent. It's just it is kind of like he is a bit of a gambler. Like he's gonna make some big mistakes. He's gonna break you as much as he pushes the team forward. But I do think just to make a kind of interesting connection here, I think this is the exact situation that the Falcons by picking Michael Penix didn't want to be in. The rest of the Raiders roster is pretty ready, especially on offense. Not as much on defense, especially on offense. Where you've got like you have Devontae Adams, you have now Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. Like you've got a decent O-line. Like the pieces are there-ish, but they don't have the main guy to make it go. And that's why the Falcons are like, we don't ever want to be in that situation, because they don't think the Raiders will ever be bad enough to be picking in the top 5 to draft a quarterback like this. But I think that so I think my point being, I think Minshew and O'Connell should be bridge guys. I don't know necessarily where you go from there. Like they are in a bit of limbo in that sense.
Yeah. And that's where I just repeat the same thing, where it's like it just comes down to like who you think has the potential to not be a bridge guy for you, right? Because I agree with you. I think Minshew's ceiling is being that bridge starter. And I don't necessarily disagree in the fact that O'Connell is also that. I just think out of the two, to potentially become that next level starter for you for the next 10 years, O'Connell definitely has the potential more than Minshew. I think Minshew can fill in. I think he can fill in very, very well. And I think you can be a starter for a team like the Raiders or like those types of teams. He is your, like, I think he's a journeyman in a sense, is kind of what I kind of would compare Minshew to a little bit. I think he is a very highly skilled, high, top of like the market journeyman, right? And I don't think that the Raiders will be his last stop.
Yeah. And I mean, that has been his career, right? Jacksonville to Philly to Indianapolis to now the Raiders. But I think that's kind of O'Connell's ceiling generally too. We don't know what he's going to be, but it's just bad team building, I think, to hitch your wagons on a 4th round pick. And this isn't like a guy like Dak Prescott who just came out guns blazing. He was just pretty good. He was better than Jimmy G, but he was pretty good. But if you want to take that next step, like it's not I don't think he's that guy.
Yeah.
For you. I think it'll be really interesting to see how this team does next year. I just think they are in a bit of a tricky scenario with how the draft played out this year, with how the next year's quarterback draft is looking not necessarily that great, and with how I think they have a decent enough team around them to not be in contention for that top 5 pick. I just think it's just a really rough situation where I think you have to be looking for, I don't know if it is maybe like already brought him up, but if you're looking for a Dak Prescott or somebody in free agency, that may be their only move. I just think they're in a bit of a limbo here, and it's kind of a frustrating situation for Raiders fans.
Stuck in mediocrity is what it is, right? Where like this is probably the best like team outside of the quarterback position you'll probably have in the next 3 years, but there's a good chance that this will be the worst quarterback you'll have over the next 3 years if you want to look at it like that. So it's an interesting spot to be in. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Who knows? I think the lowest odds thing that could potentially happen is Minshew turning into that next big starter. But because I love Minshew, and I think he's a
Smith arc, right?
Exactly. I was gonna say it would be I would be all for
the same thing with Baker Mayfield.
Yep. Oh, there you go. Right.
It's the same thing with Baker Mayfield, and that's maybe where we, like I said at the start, it's maybe where we look back on this and say like, oh my God, how did we not see this? Minshew had a really good season last year with the Colts, and he just got even better.
Oh yeah,
throwing to Devontae Adams.
Or maybe Aiden O'Connell is your Kyle Trask.
Who knows?
Yeah, there you go. Who knows? We'll just have to see. Talk. People love the Trask talk. We should rename the podcast Trask Talk. We should. I wonder if we could get Kyle Trask on the podcast. Maybe that's something we gotta try.
That feels like an achievable goal, generally. Like,
what's Kyle?
Like
Trask
we're not shooting for the moon. We're shooting for Kyle Trask.
We're shooting. Oh God. We just gotta hope he doesn't hear that before he comes on.
I mean, Kyle Trask is the bar. This is the bar of excellence.
Oh, we're looking in our
There is
guests.
no higher there's no higher ceiling than
I have
Trask.
said to you before that I think we should start bringing on more guests, or we should make an effort to. I've
start.
There, maybe there you go. I will say that I was the one saying that, and I have not made any effort. So there is also that fact. But yeah.
Should have had Ryan on for the Leaf segment.
Yes, we should have. That would have been a terrific idea. Yeah, that, and also
Ryan, if you're watching this, Ryan is a constant trick play watcher. He watches from time to time. I don't think he'd be watching deep into the Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell segment, but if you're watching, Ryan, we got to get you on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We should get Ryan on at some point here, even just to talk about the Leafs later on. And also we can bother him about when you're taking a swim in the ocean. Both of those things are very, very important conversations to have.
Right. Thank you guys so much for watching this week. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check us out on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, wherever you can find social media things. We are there. Check us out. Other than that, we'll go to shoutouts for the week. I think my shoutout is kind of lame for this week, but it's kind of been like the one thing that I have been hyper fixated on, and this is one that this is like, I don't know if you'll be able to relate to this as much, Simon, but the Drake Kendrick Lamar feud that has been going on gets my shout out for the week. Just because I won't delve too deep into it, because you could spend like an hour talking about it.
Sure.
But it's just been so fun to just see how insane this has gone. And especially as a big Kendrick Lamar fan myself, getting 4 songs by him in the span of a week, when otherwise he didn't drop an album in like 5 years. Very exciting. But even just the progression of it, to see people then just going back and forth and escalating from Drake being like, haha, you wear size 7 shoes and you're short, to Kendrick being like, you're all of these crimes that I won't list on the podcast.
No, I've heard lightly about that.
Yeah, it's funny. The songs are great. As someone who just appreciates the genre, and Kendrick more specifically, it's fantastic. It's just very entertaining to be like, oh my god, he dropped another song. Like, he literally dropped one like 20 minutes ago. Crazy. It's been what I've been fixated on more than anything this last week. So it gets my shout out, even if it has gone a little bit overboard at the end of it. That's okay. It was still fun. Fair enough. Me, at least, not for Drake.
My shout-out's
he didn't come out of it very well.
Going to be not quite... Yeah, no, that's true. I have heard that side of things. I haven't followed it at all. I don't know anything. I heard about the crimes that Drake was reportedly accused of, and all of that. Yes. But that's as far as I kind of went into it. I didn't even go digging after that. I was like, oh, you know what? Makes sense. Like, that adds up. That adds up with the jokes that have been made about Drake in the past. So, as someone who's not a fan of either, I kind of just like went, huh? Sipped my coffee, and then went on with my day. But yeah, no, those type of stuff are always fun, so I can at least relate to that in a sense. But my shout out,
we're waiting for we wait for the Luke Combs Morgan Wallen beef. That's when you get invested.
Oh yeah, well that's a thing already in the fan bases. You want to talk about something there? Holy
really?
Oh yeah,
it's coming. Well, you heard it here first.
Well, no, because there's the whole thing of like, oh, Morgan Wallen's not real country. No, but Luke Combs is in real country. And then they like fight to the death, and it's really funny.
Oh my god!
And it's really stupid, because neither of them are real country, if you want to look at it like that. Because real country died in a house fire when pop country became a thing. That's the whole. And I say that as a Luke Combs fan. We don't need to talk about this. This is a sports podcast. What the fuck? Anyway, my shout out for this week is, you know what? I'll give it to my lovely girlfriend who gave me. I'm in BC. I won't say which town because it's a fairly small town, but I'm in BC where my girlfriend is working for the summer. I'm staying over here for 2 weeks, basically on vacation, living rent free in their house, and she let me steal her room, which is why I'm in a different location, and probably will be in a different location for probably the same spot for next week's episode. So yeah, my shout outs to her because it is 8:20 and she's been going to bed around now. So she let me borrow, which is half the reason I'm happy we're wrapping up now, because I can give her her room back so that she can sleep and get ready for work tomorrow. But anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere you can find it. All that fun stuff. Anyway, see you next week.
And remember, Penix better have a warm ass. See you next week.
Oh, God.